Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're soaring into something really uh, iconic, Superman. You know, the image, the red cape, the S shield, that silhouette against the sky. But what if this seemingly simple character isn't just a hero? What if he's like actually this profound mirror reflecting America itself, showing us its deepest hopes, anxieties, and yeah, political shifts?
That's a great way to put it.
Our mission today is to unpack exactly that. We're going to trace how Superman, since his creation back in 1938 by these two Jewish sons of immigrants, has been more than just a champion for the little guy.
Right.
He's been called a litmus test and a barometer for the evolving American political soul, kind of a living legend adapting with the times.
Exactly. And for a character like him to stay relevant for, what, almost a century now?
Right.
He has to evolve. He inevitably ends up representing the core values, maybe even the fears of the society creating him. So in this deep dive, we'll trace that evolution. We're looking at 5 specific versions, film and TV, starting from 1978 right up to the one coming in 2025. And you'll see each Superman is kind of a unique political allegory. It really reveals how the nation's view of power changes and what the American way even means at different points.
Yeah, this isn't just about superhero movies. It's like cultural commentary. We've pulled from a really rich stack of sources for this. There's a great book, Superman Politics in America, plus a whole load of academic essays, cultural analyses. So let's jump in.
Okay.
Let's kick things off with a real classic. Richard Donner's Superman from 1978. This film landed when America was feeling, well, pretty weary. There was this historian who called it overexhaustion.
Yeah, you think about the context.
Exactly. The Vietnam War had ended badly, diplomatically speaking. Watergate had just shaken everyone's trust, brought down a president, and the economy was, frankly, struggling. High inflation, unemployment.
It really led to this deep erosion of public faith in government.
Yeah.
And you saw this shift towards free market ideas. People started wanting less government intervention, more individual freedom.
But what's fascinating, and you touched on this, is that this sort of conservative drift was happening at the same time as this huge expansion of social liberalism.
Right. The 70s also saw major pushes for women's rights. Gay rights were gaining ground, new laws for disability rights. So the country was becoming more egalitarian in some ways, even while getting more skeptical of big government. It was a really complex time. Contradictory, even.
Absolutely. And into that atmosphere comes Donner's Superman. It really felt like a nostalgic antidote to all the cynicism. Christopher Reeve's performance just radiated this utter sincerity.
Oh, completely.
I always think of that scene where he tells Lois Lane he's fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. Her reaction, that sort of incredulous laughter, it perfectly nails the skeptical mood of the era. He seems almost charmingly naive,
He does. And the film itself actively pushes back against that cynicism. John Williams' score, that soaring, majestic score, it wasn't just background music. It felt like an anthem for this idealized America Superman stood for.
A huge contrast to the gritty, downbeat movies that were popular then.
Totally. And visually, too, the film had this, they called it a memorialization aesthetic, like a loving look back, a visual retreat maybe to a simpler, almost pre-1960s vision. It sometimes felt like those classic movies from the 30s and 40s, like you said, a warm blanket in a cold time.
So if we pull all that together, what's the political takeaway? The Superman, with his earnestness, his focus on individual acts, he really was a profoundly conservative hero for that specific moment, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. He's explicitly not an agent of the state. That's key. He's more like a private citizen using his incredible power for just simple decency and acts of charity, saving cats out of trees, stopping robberies.
Right.
It's interesting, the scholar Umberto Eco critiqued this version for that very reason. He argued that by sticking to small-scale rescues, Superman kind of avoids tackling the bigger systemic problems.
Ah, okay.
But if you look at it in the context of the 70s, maybe that wasn't a flaw. Maybe that was the film's core political point. It validated that individualistic, non-governmental way of solving things. It almost completely sidesteps the big social changes of the decade, presenting this very classic, almost pre-1960s vision of America. So yeah, you could definitely call him a moderately conservative character, and maybe even a perfect harbinger of the Reagan Revolution that was literally just around the corner.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's jump forward. 1996, we get Superman, the animated series, landing right in the middle of the ambiguous 1990s.
Ambiguous is a good word for it.
Yeah, it was this time of like prosperous confusion. The Cold War was over, which led to this era of hyper-globalization. Economies getting way more interconnected and this kind of neoliberal consensus belief in free markets, less government spending.
But running alongside that, you had rising inequality becoming more obvious, these really intense partisan culture wars starting to heat up, and the rise of infotainment blurring lines between news and entertainment.
It felt like the nation was genuinely trying to figure out its new purpose. You know, suddenly the sole superpower. What now?
And the animated series really consciously tried to craft a hero for that new era. It drew a lot from John Byrne's big comic book reboot from 1986, which presented a Superman who was a bit more restrained, maybe even more vulnerable sometimes. The look of the show, too, that light deco aesthetic, it visually captured some of that tech boon optimism of the 90s, and the music, Shirley Walker's score was just magnificent, fully orchestrated, really cinematic for TV back then.
And this is where the political allegory gets really interesting, I think. The show's sophistication was in how it dealt with this new political reality. The Cold War was done, so Superman's usual external national threat, well, it changed.
Exactly. Look at Lex Luthor in this series. He's reimagined completely. He's this charismatic, amoral, and terrifyingly powerful corporate oligarch. He basically embodies those new anxieties about unchecked corporate power and wealth concentration.
So the enemy became internal, in a way, or at least not a nation state.
Yeah, or ideological. It raises that question. Who is the villain when the obvious enemy is gone? And the series introduces Darkseid, this cosmic tyrant, as the literal embodiment of fascism. The threat becomes this darker, more insidious ideology.
Wow.
In the series finale, Legacy delivers this chilling metaphor. Darkseid actually brainwashes Superman, turns him into this conquering general leading his armies. Yeah. And the implication is pretty stark, that the lone superpower, America, could, maybe without even meaning to, become the very force of oppression it once defined itself against. A really potent warning for that specific post-Cold War moment.
Okay, moving on again. Mid-2000s now. We get Superman Returns in 2006, and this one comes out under, well, the long, dark shadow of the September 11th attacks.
Undeniably, that event shaped everything.
Yeah, it was an era of national trauma. You had the Patriot Act, changing surveillance laws, the really divisive war on terror, especially the Iraq occupation, strained global alliances, and just serious political gridlock at home.
And Bryan Singer's Superman Returns was conceived as this direct, loving homage to the 1978 Donner film. It was almost like an act of cinematic resurrection.
Trying to bring back that feeling.
Exactly. And it carried this dual allegory. On one hand, it was a Christ story, the Savior returning to a world that had lost its way. But it was also very much a post-9/11 hero meant to symbolize vigor, moral righteousness, and patriotism when the country felt it needed those things desperately.
And its central message, this idea that America could solve the complex problems of its present by retreating to an idealized past, that really tapped into a dominant political feeling during the George W. Bush era, didn't it? Though maybe a flawed one in hindsight.
Definitely dominant. The film seemed to want to reframe the very messy, complex war on terror as a simple, righteous conflict. You know, clear good versus evil, just like in the old days.
But it didn't quite land, did it?
No, not really. And you could argue the project was kind of doomed to fail from the start because the context, both nationally and globally, had just irrevocably changed. That image of a pure ethical superpower.
Yeah.
It felt strained, maybe even almost comical to some people, given the realities of the Iraq War or even domestic issues like the Hurricane Katrina response.
Right.
So the film's sort of lukewarm reception commercially and critically, it really showed the limits of nostalgia as a political fix. The world had changed. A square-jawed relic, as some critics put it, maybe wasn't the hero people felt they needed anymore.
Which sets the stage perfectly for 2013 and Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. By then, the American political landscape was described as even more fractured.
Oh, absolutely. Unprecedented political polarization was the term being used. The initial hope after Obama's election had kind of soured for many. Congress was gridlocked, and you had deep divisions being exposed by movements like the Tea Party on the right and Occupy Wall Street on the left.
And the war on terror itself had shifted, right? It felt less about invasions and more about drone warfare, mass surveillance, this pervasive feeling of insecurity and fear of the other.
And Man of Steel was such a radical break from everything that came before. It gave us this moody war on terror era alien.
Totally different vibe.
Completely. The look of it, desaturated, kind of gloomy, was the polar opposite of Donner's bright optimism. And that huge climactic battle, it controversially evoked 9/11 imagery, basically turning Metropolis into a disaster zone. Hans Zimmer's score, too. Very tense, percussive, atmospheric, created anxiety, not really triumph. A very different Superman for a very different anxious time.
And Henry Cavill's Superman himself. He's defined by this profound alienation and isolation, isn't he? He's essentially framed as an undocumented immigrant. His arrival isn't a moment of wonder. It's treated like a national security crisis.
Tracked by a predator drone.
Yeah, that image is incredibly telling.
It really is. This film introduces what you could call the securitization of the hero. It feels like, for the first time, Superman's primary relationship isn't really with Lois or the public, it's with the military establishment. The whole plot almost works as an allegory for the vetting of a foreign asset. Is he safe? Can we trust him?
And General Zod becomes the perfect villain for that era.
The perfect war on terror villain,
Yeah.
exactly. He's framed as the unjust aggressor, using language that echoes just war theory, that philosophical framework about when war is morally okay. Zod is the external threat that justifies taking extreme measures.
Which brings us to maybe the film's most controversial moment, Superman snapping Zod's neck. Looking at it through this political lens, it feels like the ultimate expression of this new political reality, a reality where even Superman, the ultimate Boy Scout, cannot maintain moral purity. He exists in the cynical world that was, at that exact moment, openly debating things like enhanced interrogation techniques and drone strikes overseas.
He essentially transforms from a symbol of hope into, arguably, a weapon of the West. A protector, yes, but one forced to make brutal choices in a brutal world.
Which brings us right up to today, and looking ahead to 2025 with James Gunn's Superman. The 2020s, I mean, where do you even start? An era of compounding crises.
It really feels that way. COVID-19, massive racial justice protests after George Floyd's murder, the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the constant barrage of misinformation, extreme political polarization, these really intense culture wars. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and Gunn's Superman seems positioned as a direct engagement with this specific climate. Just the casting of David Corenswet seems to signal a return to a more classically hopeful hero, but Gunn is explicitly putting him in a contentious world.
Right. And Gunn himself has been very direct. He said the film is about basic human kindness, as something maybe we've lost track of. And he's framing Superman's origin story very clearly as that of an immigrant. He's leaning into that aspect.
And the villains we know about so far, they sound like direct analogs for today's anxieties. Lex Luthor is described as a xenophobic, power-hungry tech oligarch who weaponizes misinformation. Sound familiar?
Depressingly so. And you have these fictional nations, Borovia and Jerhonpur, which are apparently designed as an allegory for real-world wars and complex geopolitical conflicts. It doesn't sound like they're shying away from politics.
Not at all. And what's maybe most telling, connecting this back to the bigger picture, is the right-wing backlash that's already happened just based on Gunn's statements.
Yeah, I saw some of that.
The very idea of focusing on kindness or highlighting the immigrant aspect is being labeled woke or leftist in some circles. And that reaction itself, it kind of reveals the core political reality of the 2020s, doesn't it? This profound erosion of shared values.
It's pretty staggering when you think about it, that basic concepts like empathy and decency toward immigrants are no longer politically neutral ground. That marks a really significant shift in the landscape.
So it seems like the film's central political act might be this attempt at reclamation of these values, directly confronting the polarization instead of, ignoring it like the 78 film, or maybe succumbing to the cynicism like Man of Steel.
It suggests that maybe, in our current moment, the most rebellious act is to be unapologetically good. Superman's fight isn't just against supervillains anymore. It's against the political forces that have made his core values, hope, truth, kindness, seem controversial in the first place.
He becomes, in a weird way, a champion for one side in a profound ideological battle just by sticking to his traditional principles.
It's fascinating. When you step back and look at this whole journey, this 50-year evolution on screen, it really charts an incredible course through American political life. We've seen him go from this symbol of individual moral certainty when institutions were failing, to grappling with systemic threats, then retreating into comforting nostalgia, then morphing into this kind of securitized warrior figure, and now maybe emerging with kindness itself as a radical political statement.
Yeah. It really feels like more than just the story of a comic book character. It's like a modern American monomyth, the ongoing story the nation tells itself to try and make sense of its own often chaotic history. The Superman we see in any given era really does seem to be the Superman that reflects our collective political and social psyche at that moment.
He's not just flying through the sky. He's kind of flying through the American zeitgeist.
Absolutely. It reminds you that famous line, the never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. It isn't just Superman's battle. In so many ways, it is America's own ongoing struggle, uniquely documented by this constantly shifting, iconic character.
A really powerful lens to view the last half century through.
Definitely. So as you, our listeners, reflect on all this, here's something to maybe chew on. If even Superman's most basic values, truth, justice, kindness, can now be seen as partisan, what does that actually suggest about the future of shared ideals in America? And how might our heroes, fictional or otherwise, keep reflecting that struggle? What does this whole deep dive prompt you to consider about the American way in your own life right now?